Hey guys, it's your host Julian. This week I'm sitting down with King of the Hill writer Michael Jamin to talk all things King of the Hill and his new book, A Paper Orchestra. I cannot recommend Michael's book enough. Check the show notes below and grab a signed copy from Michael. I want to give a special shout out to a couple of our patrons that help make this podcast possible. Bill, Brent, Brittany, Eight-Legged Bird, Jacob, Nick, and Patrick. Thank you all so much for your support. It truly means a lot. If you want to become a patron and help support this show, check the show notes below and sign up today. Now, let's get on to my chat with Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to What's My Head podcast. Your host Julian. Today I'm joined by Michael. Michael, welcome to the show, man.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, man. So the fans out there know my absolute love for King of the Hill. I was raised on this show. This show informed me how to be an adult and how to be a young teenager, man. So taking a step back, how does Michael get on to King of the Hill?
So I've been a writer for 28 years, and I started on a show called Just Shoot Me with my writing partner. We wrote on that, and then our agent, we were on Just Shoot Me for 4 years. And then King of the Hill made us a job offer, so we bounced on to King of the Hill.
How difficult is it in your industry? Is it easier to land a job when there's two of you, or is it easier when you're solo?
In theory, it's easier when you have a writing partner because it's basically two writers for the price of one, in theory. So, yeah.
I got you. Now, when you're on King of the Hill, obviously you were just coming from Just Shoot Me, you had said. How did you find out about King of the Hill? Were you a fan of the show prior and then just something popped up and you wanted to apply?
No, I mean, I remember Just Shoot Me was just on, and I think King of the Hill was on opposite us in the time slot. And I remember watching an episode where Bobby falls in love with like a mannequin head. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is really a good show. And I was like, we're in trouble. But then we wound up moving time slots. And so we were not up against King of the Hill, but for a minute we were. But then, what happens is, so our contract was up at Just Shoot Me. And so at that point, as negotiating leverage, your agent takes you out to other shows, and who was interested. And so King of the Hill was interested in us. And that was it was negotiating tactic, but we're like, you know what? This is a really good show. Why don't we just jump on it? Instead of messing around, why don't we just jump on it?
Right on. So what's that? Obviously, there's a lot of similarities in the subtle humor. David Spade being in that one, with Just Shoot Me, and then Mike Judge's sensibility and humor with Greg Daniels and King of the Hill. Is it hard switching gears from obviously live action to animation for you?
No, not really. I mean, people think it is. It's just writing is writing. I write scripts. I don't really care if you animated it or shoot it with live people, but it's none of my business, however you want to shoot it.
I like that. Now I've had a lot of the directors on and a couple board artists, background artists, and they always start out with a pencil test. How is a writer coming on the show? Do you guys have some form of a test to see if you can write the scripts?
Well, they want to read your writing samples, so you have to have writing samples that they think could match the tone of your show.
Oh, so they won't give you like Bobby does this or Peggy
No,
does this.
no. You just read they read your writing samples, and that's it.
Got you. Now, when you're starting to when you guys get hired and you're starting to get knee deep in King of the Hill, what are some of the things that you're doing to assimilate to the King of the Hill? Are you guys going anywhere, trying to figure out what Texan lifestyle is? How does that work for you?
We took a road trip to Texas to absorb the culture. The whole staff we went. They went a handful of times. Many of the writers on King of the Hill were from Texas, so if you had a question about the culture, you just ask them, and so and that they help bring the authenticity to the. But that's not, the stories are human emotions. They're just human. They're humans, and so you just pepper it in with some Texas culture.
What do you latch onto for a story? Is it the heart? Is it the motivation of these characters? What drives Michael to write?
Well, right, for television, you mean?
Well, we'll do both. Television, if it's different than the King of the Hill answer.
Yeah. Well, for King, well, okay, for TV as a whole, you're just trying to come up with a story that can engage people for 22 minutes. And so, and that means there has to be some kind of emotional The stakes have to be high. It has to be emotion attached to the story. And then you're pitching it to the boss, and then you'll pitch 5 ideas to the boss, the showrunner, and the showrunner will say that one. That's the one we're going to work on.
Got you. And so I told you before we hit record, man, I found you, it was probably last year, it was right during the strike, and
Mhm.
you were on Instagram all the time. And the first video I see, I don't know how it popped up into my feed. It was probably, I was just searching King of the Hill. You might have had a King of the Hill video out there, but it
Mhm.
was you went after a troll essentially. I can't remember the context of the whole thing,
Right.
but I remember I'm outside, I'm smoking a joint, and then I'm in tears, laughing my ass off of you just eviscerating this guy. Now,
I have mixed
well,
feelings about doing that, by the way. I'm not
yeah,
sure if I
because
should
people
be
are
doing that.
crazy.
People are
People are
crazy,
fucking
right?
crazy.
Yeah. So I just felt like, well, I am a comedy writer. Like I can do this. I know how to weaponize words. I can make it funny, but then again, people are crazy. So
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about Michael's book here very shortly, Paper Orchestra, but I wanted to bring it up for just a second because it kind of goes into this question.
yeah.
Um, it was probably the first couple chapters of your book, and I don't know how much you want to give away from the book, but there's 3 parts of your book that I found absolutely left me in awe. I had to go back and reread it a couple times, and I was just blown away each time because I would pick up different details,
Oh,
like most people do when you go back and look. The
thank you.
one where you were talking, no, thank you. When you were talking about your, I think it was judo, right? Was
Yeah.
what your dad and your mom put you into. Now, I found this extremely fascinating because my oldest son does Kempo karate and he does the whole fighting and sparring every other weekend. We've got a tournament we're going to, and I don't know what it's like as a parent for what your parents were going through, but I got to imagine it was probably the same. Just watching somebody else hit your kid, watching somebody, oh, for goodness
Mm,
sakes, I'm gonna edit that
mm.
one out. Watching something like that happen, I just stressful, right? So reading your
Yes.
account for judo, you felt like a fish out of water. You did not belong is the sense that I was
Mhm.
getting it from. Now, equating that into an episode you wrote for King of the Hill, it was the witches of East Ireland. Obviously,
Mhm.
throughout the entire series, the whole running thing is Hank doesn't understand the generation. He doesn't understand Bobby. Did
Yeah.
any of that judo, karate, did any of that influence the writing for this episode?
Not really. I got to say
No?
no. So, that's I almost forgotten all about that judo story until I wrote the book. And
Mm,
so when we were writing The Witches of East Ireland, we were coming with ideas, and I'm in my office with my writing partner. We're just bouncing ideas off each other, and he said, "What if Bobby was a Wiccan?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, because he years ago he dated a girl whose mother was a Wiccan, and he goes, she was that means she was a witch." I go, "Wait, what do you mean she was a witch?" And he explained to me. I go, "Wait, did she think she had powers? She knew she didn't have powers, but she liked to pretend she did." And I was like, I'm all ears. Tell me more,
crazy.
because I'm like, this is fascinating. And so that kind of became the basis of what the Wiccans of East Ireland. And the funny thing is about that, we needed a character name for the villain, like the main Wiccan, the main guy. And we're like, what's a good name for kind of a loser, kind of a douche? And just as we're saying it, the PA who gets us lunch, he comes in, and his name was Ward Rackley. And we're like, Ward Rackley. And we go, Ward, and Ward is a great guy. We go, Ward, is it okay if we name this character, this loser after you? And Ward was like, absolutely, I love it. So that's what we named the character. And Ward, he thought he was honored.
I got to imagine, dude. So, like I said, this show means so much to me, man. This is a security blanket when I deployed, and you
Oh,
have top 5 lines in here. I don't know if you'll remember it,
mhm.
but when Bobby finally gets pulled out by Hank, and he's going, essentially, thanks for not letting me get my ass kicked, right?
Yeah,
He's in there and he's explaining to Bobby that that Ward's probably going to die with his mom, and then or he's living with his mom until she dies.
yeah.
And then probably a couple weeks after,
Yeah,
that was such a fun line. Do you know who might have wrote that, you or your partner? I know
I,
it's a
I,
tough question to
I
ask.
don't, we wrote this episode 20 something years ago.
Yeah.
I wanna give my credit to my partner. But honestly, I want to say it's him, but very often we take credit for each other's lines because we forget.
Yeah.
It's very possible. Like often, like he'll pitch a joke, and I laugh so hard, I go that I think it's mine, and vice versa, probably. So I don't
Huh.
know. It's probably his though.
Well, with you guys, is he the only writing partner you've ever had?
Yeah, we've been writing together for 30 something years.
Got you. And when you're looking for a writing partner, when you find a writing partner, is it easier to go, or not easier, because I'm sure it is. Is it better for you if you guys have not so much a yin and a yang, but you guys have different, are you guys similar is what I'm getting at when it comes to comedy writing and all that other stuff?
Well, a partnership is really like a marriage. I mean, your marriages have to work, and it's not uncommon for partnerships to dissolve because they just don't get along, or at some point. Um, in the beginning, we had different skill sets and different tastes, but over the years, we've really developed, very similar tastes and skills, and so much so that, sorry, so much so that when we're giving notes, we each get like work on someone else's script, and I'm writing notes and he's writing notes, and we have so much overlap in the notes. I feel the same way that he's feeling because of over the years we've kind of developed this kind of style of what we aspire to do when we write, and so that's kind of the nice thing. So which means there's a lot less fighting over stuff. We're like, yeah, that's do it that way.
Um, Now, when you guys are writing these episodes in particular, do you guys like to, well, every person I've talked to, I think you're probably the first writer I've actually had on from King of the Hill. Now,
Hmm.
when I talk to the artist, they get your script and then they work off of your script. The art comes
Hmm.
from you guys' script. Now,
Right.
since you guys are a partner, are you guys in the entire writing room just pitching ideas? Do they give you an idea or a title for an episode and do they say,
Oh
go
no,
write
no.
some stuff or?
No, your job as a writer is to come up with episode ideas and you pitch it to the boss and say that there might be something there. And then you'll spend a week or so trying to figure out what the story is. And then, no, we come up with the ideas. Occasionally, the boss will say, I was driving home last night and the idea hit me. Who wants to write it? And then, yeah, I'll do it. You
Got you.
know.
Now, for you in particular, when you guys have an episode that you're writing, it's already been lit as far as the sense of go ahead and write this. This has got it's got something to it.
Mhm.
Do you like starting at the beginning, the middle, the end? Do you like starting with a specific key moment in the episode and working your way
Oh
forward
no,
backwards from that?
you always start from the beginning. I mean, because you may
Mm.
not, you may not, yeah. Uh, Well, I shouldn't say you always. It happens. I suppose it could happen a number of ways, but we'll talk about an idea, and then we'll talk about, oh, what could we build to? What's a potential second act break? So it's very amorphous in the beginning, and you're kind of filling in things and trying to figure out how the story works and how it feels. But typically, we'll start. This is like upper level writing, but we will start with the first act break. This is what the first
Mm.
act break is. Let's go from there. So
Now,
that's kind of the beginning.
do you feel like do you like to open more of the episode? Do you like to close it? Do you like to tie everything together? How does that marriage that you and Sievert have work when it comes to an
Mm.
episode?
Well, we sit at the computer at the same time. We have one computer and two monitors. So one of us
Mhm.
will type, and the other one stare off into space and zone out. So
So
it's like,
it's
are you paying attention? No.
it's like going to driving school and somebody else has the brake, is what you're saying. Well,
Yeah.
they have the gas in a
I
sense.
mean, part of the fun of having a writing partner is that you don't have to concentrate entirely all the time. You can let someone else do it.
Uh, there's a story in your book that I really enjoyed that you were staring off into space when you were
Mm.
getting or you were pitching yourself to get hired. And then
Hmm.
Sievert came up with an elaborate story, and then that striked your
Yeah.
curiosity. You tuned in. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna get to that book in just a sec. I love this book. Um,
Thank you.
so when you're writing these episodes, is there obviously all the artists have characters that were very difficult, very easy to write for, or excuse me, draw. And the one that came up the most was Bobby was the hardest one to draw for. He had the most heart in the entire series, but he was one of the most difficult to start because that head was very weird. It was very hard to turn him in
Oh, interesting.
three-dimensional space, right? So Cotton was the same thing, and it wasn't until I had Glenn Dion and he said Bobby is a mix between Hank and Bobby, or excuse me, Cotton and Hank.
Mm.
So you would just take Bobby, make him a little bit older, and put some of Hank's sensibilities, his sternness in him. And then you would take him, and everybody always drew him wrong. And they said, draw him like he was still 6'4", because that's what Cotton was before he had his shins blown off, but
Hmm.
draw him like he was in a hole. And that's how all the artists really got to
In a
it.
hole.
Yeah, you would draw
Mm.
picture Cotton in a hole. So he's still
Mm.
6'4", right? but you would draw him like if he was dropped down, what was it, fucking almost a foot. And that's how
Yeah.
people could get around the notions because the anatomical process, they would say, was really,
Yes.
really difficult. So he broke it out, and that's how he did it.
That's
Was there
funny.
any was there any things like that for the writing side that you guys would do to help with the character flush out, or was there any characters hard to write for?
Well, I will say this before I answer that. We took a tour one day of the because the animators would work in a separate building. They were
Mhm.
subcontractors, so we didn't really interact too much with them. But one day we took a tour to the animation studio. I don't think they were there. Maybe they were on lunch or I don't know what. And I was shocked by how many they have these cubbies,
Mhm.
cubicles, and I was shocked by how many nude drawings they had of every single character. I was like, oh my God, you guys are so sick. They were so sick. And it was like, oh, I loved it. I loved the fact that they were, they did like pinups of Peggy and like like having sex. And it was just so funny. And what I loved about it was not that how perverted it was, although that was funny. I just loved that they were really these characters. They felt such a closeness to these characters that they could treat them like that, which I was like, wow, they have a whole backstory to these characters that I'm not even aware of, which I loved.
They've got their own
Like
fan
they hang,
fiction.
like yeah, like someone's got a tiny dick. I like, wow, I that's not my mind, but I'm glad it's in your mind.
So, since we're talking tiny dicks here, Michael, I
Yeah.
figured you broached the subject, and I figured we can go down this rabbit hole just a little bit. Who had the tiniest of the tiniest?
Who had the tiny Peggy.
Jesus.
You did not see that coming.
No, I didn't. I
No.
mean, neither did anybody else walking by
Yeah.
that tiny winger. Um, so speaking of Peggy for just a second, I didn't know this because like I said, I love all of these characters for different reasons, but there's a huge portion of the fan base that absolutely just despise Peggy. Did you see that in the
Oh.
writers' room whatsoever? Not so much with Peggy, but with a specific character, or did you guys hate writing for Peggy?
No, we love Peggy. The problem, see, the thing is, the struggle with Peggy's how do you make this character? It's very typical back then. It was like you have all these for a female character, not to make her the straight woman, and just like
Mhm.
because everyone you're so there, you need a straight man in the show, and like Marge is not Marge Simpson's not a fun character to write for. Homer's the funny one, right? And
Mhm.
so is Bart. And so when you're writing for these characters, I think the temptation was to make Peggy a straight woman, but isn't it more fun to, how can we give her something that's fun? And so the, that turned into, well, let's make her a know-it-all because know-it-alls they're vulnerable. They, we know they don't know it all, but that's their weakness, but that makes them fun, makes them funny. And so know-it-alls, I guess, slowly turned into, insufferable know-it-all for some people. But
Mhm.
I was always very sympathetic to Peggy. She has a good heart and she's just insecure. That's all. You know, she's
Yes.
insecure.
She's that piece of everybody that's one of us that we always try to deny. You always hate what you see in yourself, at least
Yeah.
something along those lines.
So I don't think the writers hated Peggy. I don't think we definitely didn't want anybody to hate Peggy. We were just trying to make her funny and human.
Now, did like I said, there's two things that I've learned from doing this podcast by watching the show for the last 25-ish years. I'm
Mhm.
34, so yeah, I didn't do too well in math in high school. Michael
Oh,
is
I
what I'm
got
getting
Dale
at.
over
So,
here, by the way. If you want to see Dale
y-
Gribble smoking a cigarette,
oh,
there he is.
absolutely, bring them on.
Okay, here, Dale, say something.
I can't.
Hank, conspiracy. There you go. So he's always, God, is he dusty? Dusty Shackelford. Okay,
Oh,
nice. All right,
bravo. Since we're showing King
bravo.
of the Hill stuff, I'll show you this. I was sent this a little coffee mug by
Mhm.
uh, Ian Wilcox's brother. Ian Wilcox was a background guy, background painter, excuse me, and a background artist. He passed away last year.
Oh,
And they've heard every time I do, I've actually forgot to tell you this portion of the show, because we'll talk about the people you've worked with, and
mhm.
not. I know you guys didn't get to work so much with the animators,
Right.
or excuse me, the artists, the directors, and everything like that.
The
So,
directors would come
um,
to the table read, but we wouldn't, we'd give them notes, but they were in a
yeah.
different building.
Yeah, so Ian was a very big fixture in that side of the production process, and
Mhm.
he was the guy that everybody loved to be around, make fun of, joke with, and everything like that. He was just this charismatic person that, like I said, everybody loved. And his brother heard some of the episodes I did, and we did this. Everybody would tell a story about Ian, so everybody had a story about Ian.
Hmm.
And then he was like, "Hey, I'd like to send you something." And he actually sent me his coffee mug, which
That's that's
got
sweet.
my eyes, yeah, got my eyes a little misty,
Yeah.
But speaking of
Hmm.
old Rusty Shackelford,
Hmm.
obviously Johnny is no longer
Hmm.
here.
Yeah.
In one of the videos that I saw of you, you gave him, or well, the writers' room had already given him a nickname, but he was called Johnny Two Checks. I love
Johnny
this
Two
video.
Checks. Yeah.
Johnny Two Checks, man. And Michael, I got to imagine it was Michael Two Checks as well because you voiced, I think you voiced one character in here, but
Yeah.
did,
Only once. Now Johnny did it obviously every episode. I just did it
yeah.
once. So yeah.
Do you have any fun stories about writing? Did you get to interact with him on the writing side at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I joined the staff, he was a writer, but then he slowly decided to leave the writing part and just became, he was a writer and a performer. And then
Mhm.
we had about a year overlap where we worked closely, and Johnny was a really good writer. But then I guess he decided he was making too much money, and why get paid as a writer and an actor when I could just show up once a week as an actor and make a lot of money. And I felt bad because I like Johnny, don't go, because he was fun to be around. Everyone liked hanging around with Johnny, but he's like, yeah, but I don't really want to work as a writer anymore. So, yeah, but he was a lot of everyone loved Johnny. He was a character.
So when you hear that name Johnny Hardwick, is there a
Yeah,
story that comes to mind, or is there a memory that comes to mind?
we we did a road trip to Austin. At that point, I think he was no longer a writer; he's just an actor, and we visited him at his house, and he had in Austin, and he had a teepee on the front lawn. I was like, "Wait, you had teepee?" He's like, "Yeah, man, get a teepee. Come smoke, smoke some weed." Like, and that was Johnny, man. He had like a tea, like only Johnny would have a teepee in his lawn, and everyone loved him. I mean, like it didn't even surprise us that he had a teepee. It was big. It was a real
Yeah.
deal. He just liked to mellow out, play the drums or whatever the hell he's doing his teepee.
Hey man, there's something about having people call it fuck you money, man. There's something about having fuck you money where you can just wake up and do whatever it is
Yeah,
your heart
yeah.
tells you to do.
Well, he didn't have kids either, so that helps.
It does, doesn't it, man?
Yeah.
But last thing about Johnny, because I heard this from a couple different people on, the behind the scenes DVD commentary things that they used to do, and they would say it was with Johnny, it was like he was the character of Dale, but he would slowly morph into that, where he became somewhat of a conspiracy guy, somewhat of this, somewhat of that.
I don't
Did
know.
you?
I don't know if that's true, but the character of Dale changed. In the beginning, he's real angry, Hank,
Yeah,
and then he became more of a feckless kind of, so he changed. Johnny changed the character, of
yeah.
Dale. Yeah.
Do you remember any do's or don'ts specifically with Dale?
There was someone, I saw someone post a video on TikTok where there's a theory that Dale knew that Joseph wasn't his son. And this is
Hmm.
all a long con to get back at Nancy or John Redcorn. And I'm like, there's no way, no way, because what that is a very sad, that story is sad. That's Dale's a conspiracy theorist. And it's funny that he sees conspiracy everywhere except for the one right in front of his face. That's funny. If Dale were to know that Joseph was not his son, then it's not funny. Then it's sad. Then it's
Yeah.
drama. It's not comedy anymore. And so, there was never any question in my mind that, like, maybe Dale knew in the farthest reaches of his corner of his, brain that Joseph wasn't his kid, but certainly not this part.
That's we'll move on to the next thing, but that's another thing that you guys wrote so well. Whose fingers are closer, Hank? Mine or Khan's? That whole fucking scene where they're sitting here, I'm this
Yeah.
close or I'm this much mad, and then he slaps him and jumps over he falls over the fence. It's anytime that character in Cotton was on the screen, man, I was having a good time. Um, the other one you guys worked on was Yard She Blows, and this was obviously Winklebottom, right? Peggy
Yeah.
is feeling like she doesn't contribute to the beautiful house, right? These neighbors are walking by, they see it, they tell Hank, and then she realizes like, oh shit, I don't know anything that we do here, right? So
Yeah.
she feels that wanting to be wanted or wanting to be loved, and then she's feeling that inadequate feeling of not meeting that, right? So
Yeah.
I loved this whole thing. The one thing that sticks out the most is obviously, Bobby's out there. He's playing secret agent man. Frank's Winklebottom. Hank can't fix him.
Hank throws his son under the bus.
Dude, not even just the bus. He threw him under the bus, ran him over, and then
Yeah.
backed up and ran him back. That's my favorite out of these three
Yeah.
episodes. That is my
Mhm.
favorite scene in any of the episodes was him burying him like it was a mob hit, running him
Yeah.
over, and then he's like, "No, no, I didn't finish the job. I'm gonna reverse and then run him over for a third time." So it's a
Yeah.
rule of three.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah, because Hank, that's the genesis for that being a good story. Is that Hank loves his wife, but he also loves his lawn.
Yeah.
Now he's torn. So
Absolutely, man. Now, before we wrote or right before we rotate into the book, man, I've asked all the other guys this when they've come on. When you think of King of the Hill, your time writing on it, the people you're around, is there like one word, one phrase, one sentence, one emotion that's evoked that comes to mind when you think of your time on King of the Hill or when you hear King of the Hill?
I don't know if it's one word, but it's like we were on a Just Shoot Me before that, which was a fun show. It's a blast. King of the Hill, in many ways, was less of a cartoon than Just
Mhm.
Shoot Me, even though it was a cartoon. So when you wrote for King of the Hill, we're really trying to write real, and it was like writing a miniature movie. And writing King of the Hill kind of allowed my partner and I, after that, we felt we had the confidence to write movies. And we sold a couple of movies. We probably wouldn't have been able to do that had we not been on King of the Hill, because it teaches you that kind of small storytelling.
And then one more thing, if you can excuse me, if you can go back and relive any moment in your King of the Hill tenure, is there one that sticks out? Office party, writing
Oh,
a rap party, anything like that?
well, I don't know. I wouldn't know about reliving, but for the first year we're there, the hours were really bad. So we would work sometimes till 4 in the morning, and I
Mm,
would like it was rough. And I used to sit in the back of the room. We had a big writer's room, and maybe I'll do a post about this, but I sat in the same old chair with these big wooden pillars. I'd sit in it, and then I would, when you're working after midnight, you start losing your mind, and I would start poking at it with a thumbtack into the
mhm.
wooden, and I slowly started digging a hole into this pillar of the chair holding it up, and the other writers, they became hopeful because they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm drilling a hole out of here," and they were rooting for me, like, "Go keep," and every day, and I'd slowly pick out like Shawshank, and then when you finally got to the other side, I put a picture of Rita Hayworth, and then I had a toilet paper rope ladder gutting out, and all the writers were rooting for me. No one was like, "Stop breaking the furniture." Everyone was like, "Keep digging, Chairman. Keep going." It
And
was a
there it
fun.
goes.
It was a fun writing staff. I mean, everyone like there was a lot of really fun people on that show.
And there it goes. Andy Dufresne had to, what did he
Yeah,
say, walk through a mile of shit.
yeah,
Oh man. Did you make it through to the other? Well, obviously you made it through to the other side,
yeah.
but did you ever
I
get
know,
all
big
the, did you
hole
bore through?
all the way through, and the hole was about this big. It was a big hole. It was good work.
Yeah.
It was good work.
Right on, man. So I figure we could rotate in the book. Like I told you before, man, I tend to stick when it comes to books. I'm a comic book guy. I still go get I got my stack of comics over here. I go get those every Wednesday. When it comes to reading anything, it's typically World War II history or just
Great,
history in general, man. I just love that type of stuff. I don't know why. It's just something that fascinates me. But when I saw you had your book out, and I started reading it, I told you, man, first probably 2 pages, I was hooked. And
right?
I don't know what it was. Well, I know what it was. It was great writing. I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to blow smoke. This is one of the most, ladies and gentlemen, you got to go find this book. You can go on Michael, what's your website name? You know it better than I do.
Yeah, michaeljamin.com/book if you want to get a signed copy, or if you go there, there's links. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and it's called A Paper Orchestra.
And those links will be in the description. Click them,
Yeah,
and you can go to wherever Michael wants you to go to with books, podcasts, anything like that. This book was so fun. I'm going to start at the end, and then I guess we can kind of work from the beginning.
sure.
You had a line in there, and I can't remember exactly where, so it might not have been the end, but you'd thrown the idea out to your wife, like you wanted to write a book, about you. And then she said something to the effect of, you should do it because you'll find yourself. I think
Yeah.
that's surmise that topic, right? So, do you feel like you felt yourself? As douchey as that question is that I just asked you, do you feel like you found yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, so all the
Yeah.
stories they're true stories about little moments in my life, and I was trying to just piece it together. Like why did I remember? They're all little memories, and so why did I remember? Some of them are really old. Why do I hang on to that little memory? Because I don't have a terrific memory. And so if
Mhm.
I hung on to something, there had to be a reason why I remembered that. There had to be some emotional attachment to it. And then as I started digging into it, I'm thinking, why would I have said that as a child? Why would I have done that? And then I would think, as a character, why would he do this? And sometimes I didn't know. And then I would think of other memories, and then patterns would form, and I'm like, oh, I'm starting to understand this little boy now, who was me,
Mhm.
years ago. But you just don't think of yourself that way. You live, and you don't really think of yourself as a character in your own show, which is what I basically am. And so at the end, I absolutely found myself. I figured out parts of myself that I just hadn't looked at in my entire life. And by
Was
doing this, I hope, to tell your story as well. So you can that's why I think you resonate. You go, oh yeah, I did that. I'm similar. Now I understand myself too, you know.
brother, that one broke me down, man. Was there
Mm.
anything, with you exploring all of these pieces of yourself that you haven't explored, maybe ever at that point that were very
Oh
hard to
yeah,
dip into?
absolutely. So the stories alone was hard. Your story you're talking about is called
Yeah.
Alone, but also the Ghoul was very difficult for me to write, as well as A Plague Upon Your House. And a lot
Mhm.
of it was just dealing with the fact that I really have a lot of anxiety, and it hadn't really occurred to me how anxious I am. But my wife's like, "Oh yeah, you're," and I'm like, "Oh yeah." It's like I'm obviously older than you, but growing up, anxiety was a comedy term that Woody Allen would talk about.
Yeah.
I have anxiety, and it always seemed like he was
Mhm.
just doing a character, and so I never was like, I'm not, I don't want to be a character, so I don't have that. Uh, but I do.
Yeah. Well, with that with your book entire with your book in a whole, um, when you're writing this, obviously you changed almost all of the names. I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure you changed almost all of them.
Yeah.
Um, has there been anybody that's reached out and said, "Hey, that story is about me," and they were kind of upset about it?
No, no, but first of all, like I said, I changed the names and I changed some of the characteristics of these people so that probably wouldn't even know if they read it about themselves.
Gotcha.
But even if they had, I feel like in all the stories, I'm still the villain. Like
Yeah.
no matter, even if I poke fun of them a little, I poke fun of myself even harder. I'm still the villain. So the only story that I felt maybe I was a little worried about was the Marissa disclaimer, because I didn't want to hurt that the girl. She's a woman now. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But when you read it, like, I'm still the jerk in it. She's not. I am the jerk. You know.
Now, did this feel like closure at all?
No, I don't. I don't know. I'm not sure if I just. To me, that's like a word that people use. Closure.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't know. I still struggle with certain things. I don't really have closure over anything. It's just an acknowledgement of this thing that was lurking back in my corner of my psyche, and now it's out in the open, but it's still there.
Is it hard to uh is it hard to push that? Like usually when there's something uncomfortable that we're all dealing with, it's you
Mm.
can push it back and push it back and push it
Yeah.
back. And I found out you really can't do that when you like cannabis, right? Because
Oh,
everything that
oh.
you've been repressing, hey man, remember you said we were going to think about this later. Now we're going to think about this for the rest of the night and you're not going to get any sleep. So when you're going through this Rolodex essentially of your life and you're looking at these
Mhm.
core memories that you have, and like you said, you hadn't thought about some of these things in quite some time. Were any of them kind of hard to like let go even after you wrote that chapter on it?
We let go in what way?
Like, so you have something and you can, like, sometimes you can prioritize certain thoughts, right? So you can
Mhm.
prioritize sadness or anger or anything like that. So I say something happens to me. I'm going to think about that later. I'm not going to really let that get under my skin. But when you
Mm.
have something like ripping off a band-aid, right? Letting air
Mhm.
expose everything. You have a story like Alone. You
Yeah.
have that out in the open now. You know you're dealing with that. You might have kind of left that back in maybe 2021 or 2022. It's now 2024. Is it hard to kind of put that back in its place where you can move past it and grow from any of your
The
past
thing is,
experiences?
if regardless of we mentioned cannabis, but whether or not, and we all have stuff in our wounds, problems, things that we're not proud of, that we're not happy with. Most of us choose not to look at it,
Hmm.
but not looking at it doesn't make it go away. It's still there, and
Yeah.
it'll still affect your life whether you look at it or not. And so if you look at it, it loses some of its power, and you gain a little more agency over your life. So you feel like, I can maybe write my own story as opposed to being being a character that's stories written about me in some way, you know?
Got you. So your main character, Vice, and NPC. At least that's what I'm taking from it. You
Yes, a
can
little
kind
bit
of
like
control
that.
your story.
A little bit like that,
Um,
yeah.
was one of the ones that I found really, really fascinating as well was every time, not every time you would find any little bit of adversity or something was like not going your way, but you have these really big moments like a lot of kids do. Like my parents got divorced really young,
Mhm.
and when you were talking about your parents getting divorced, you found football, right? A
Yeah,
punter of all things. It's like
yeah.
I look at all of this like bios for you and reading just what you've done in your career. And the one thing I wasn't thinking was football punter. I don't know
No.
shit about football. If we're being, I know
Mm,
they punt it. I know they throw it. That's about.
yeah.
Basketball and sumo wrestling are the only two sports that I can get into.
It's sumo,
Weird.
okay.
Yeah, I know. I,
Yeah.
I I can send you some clips. It's really cool shit, man. It's something to get
Uh-huh.
into. It's very, very fun. But nonetheless, man, this is about you, not about me. Um, with that one in particular, what was it like going back into that teenage mindset and thinking about that? Did anything come up that was different that you might have remembered?
It was really about, so the day that's a story about how I was a nerdy kid and I wanted to be something better than a nerd, and how I tried out for the football team as a punter just because I wanted to kick a ball far. And so that story is about a moment of grace where we all do something that's bigger than ourselves that we don't usually, like, if you're lucky, you get to experience a moment of grace once or twice in your lifetime. It's the grace meaning like the hand of God giving you this power that you ordinarily wouldn't have. And so you do this thing that's larger than you, which is wonderful. But the day it happened, when I remember the day it happened, obviously, when I kicked that ball as in college, um, like I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't go back to my roommate and say, "You'll never believe what I did. I just kicked a ball really far." Like
Yeah.
no one's, so what? And so it's only when you put it in the context of a story and you take it all the way back to the beginning, to that day when I was like 6 or whatever, like then it becomes a story. So at the moment when it happened, it really, there was almost nothing there. So that's why writing the book and figuring out these moments, how do I turn this little moment to a story? You get so much clarity over your life and you go, oh, that's who I am. I'm the kid who just wanted to experience a moment of grace, and got it. Thankfully.
It was a beautiful story, the whole book, but that chapter in particular, because,
Thank
you
you.
know, whenever you look at you write this stuff for a living, so I'm not going to tell you, but I mean, you watch something and then sometimes there's these little hints thrown out there of like how something's going to end. Like,
Mhm.
oh, I've been following this show for the last 2 years. They're going really hard into this character's backstory. They're giving him some touch. He's getting ready to die at the end of this episode. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So I was the way I was reading it was I was like, oh, is this going to be he gets egg on his face at the end, but for you to be the hero at the end and you got to I don't want to say scratch something off of your bucket list, but you got
Mm.
to find grace in something.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just thought that whole moment, the payoff was really pretty.
Yeah. Thank you. And that, I mean, you have a really insightful way of, you've given it a lot of thought, so I appreciate that.
Oh,
Yeah, but that's yeah, that's what I try to make all my stories. Like if I'm taking you on a journey as a writer, like why am I taking you to the end if there's not a good view? Like what's the view of the story? What are we looking at now? And so that's what I try to build to at the end of all my stories. Like what's the view?
how many stories do you think you crossed out before you settled on the ones that you wrote about?
Yeah. So there's 17 in the book, but I have several other that I'm saving for the next book, and I have a couple that I thought they're good, but they didn't fit tonally with the other stories. They just felt like they didn't match the tone. So I'm like, eh. And then several stories, the beginning ones were just not good enough to include. I go, that's some of them like, okay, I wrote the story and it's not, I don't like it. Like it's not, if it doesn't move me, if it's not good enough for me, it's not going in the book. So
Which one was the hardest one to write about?
well, emotionally, the hardest ones to write about were the Ghoul and A Plague Upon Your House, but because it was just like I was going there in terms of the truth, the hurtful truth.
And which
But
one
some
were
of this,
those? Which one were those two? I'm sorry to interrupt. Which one were those two
sure,
again?
the Ghoul and A Plague Upon Your House.
Okay, okay.
So the last one, that was about the pandemic. But
Hmm.
in terms of difficult stories, like even Swing and a Miss, which is the story about taking dancing classes, like my first draft that I gave to my wife on that, whatever, first draft, fifth draft, whatever, it was early. Most of these stories have 40 drafts. but she read an early draft, and it was about how I took dance lessons because my sister shamed me into being. She said, "You're a bad dancer. You got to take
Mm.
dance lessons." And so I went. And what's interesting about these classes is like it's people from all walks of life, all races, all income brackets, and people you wouldn't probably necessarily associate with because you just don't have the opportunity to. And now you're dancing, you're hugging them, you're dancing close, you're intimate with them practically. And so I wrote these. The first drafts were about them, the people in this class, and I thought, isn't it interesting? All these people. And my wife she was so bored by it. She goes, "I'm none of this is interesting, you know." And I'm like, "It isn't." And so I didn't argue with her. I said, "All right, that's not the story I should be telling them." So I went back and I tried to figure out, is there something else I can talk about with these dance classes? And then it hit me as I was just, I'm, grasping at straws here. Like, what can I write about that has something to do with dance? And at that time, there was a woman that I was, dating. I was seeing her briefly, and I went to pick her up at her house, and she was very successful. She was a few years older than me, and she was successful. And I was just like the phone boy who I had an assistant job, and I would just answer the phones, and I felt shitty about myself. But when I went to pick her up or go to her house, her apartment rather, I drove there. She was about a mile away, but I parked my car. I couldn't find a spot, so I parked it halfway between my apartment and her apartment. And I was just recalling that memory. I go, oh, that's what the story is about. This is a story about a person who's not yet a man, but no longer a boy. And so that's what the story is about. This awkward period in between when you're not a man yet and you're not a boy. Who are you?
You're on a
And that's how I
side
found.
quest.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and and that was a hard story to find. Like I said, if you were to read early drafts, it wouldn't even resemble what was in the book.
Now we don't have to get too personal. Does your wife write too?
No, but she was an actor. I met her. She was an actor I met on Just Shoot Me. And so she's a performer. She knows art.
Gotcha. Well, I was just curious because whenever I'm struggling with something, I'm pretty sure all wives or all husbands, all significant others are like this. At least the really really good ones. Whenever I'm writing something, whether it's a script for our next video, I'm sitting here writing some stuff out, what I want to talk about, what we want to cover, and then we put some video to it. If I'm having a really tough time, there's two people I can go to. Mainly, I just go to Katie, my wife, and I'm like,
Mm.
hey, I know you don't like cartoons, but if you were somebody that was just stumbled upon this video and this is some stuff with some of these visuals, would it be interesting to you? And then
Hmm.
she'll look at me and she'll give me an honest answer. She's my biggest fan and also my biggest critic in anything I do, right?
Hmm.
So, I cook for a living. So whenever I go and I say, hey, what did you think of this? She has no problem tearing it down, but for somebody that's not in the industry, I've never met somebody with a good palate or a palate as good enough as hers. I'm always
Interesting.
surprised. Yeah, because I'll give my guys, I'm a sous chef at the restaurant I work at. So I'll give my guys stuff and I go and I check, hey, what do you taste? What are you feeling? What are you getting? And then they'll say 14 things that it isn't it. And then I'll bring that same thing home and I'll give it to my wife and she'll get 3 out of the 10 or 3 out of the 4 or 3 out of the 15, whatever it is that I'm looking for at that point in time. And I'm just like, holy fuck, you're in the wrong industry. You should be doing what I do and I should be doing what you do. You're a lot better at this than I am. Um,
Interesting.
but when I bring all that up to say is like it's something nice to have when you have somebody you can lean on both emotionally, physically, financially at times, and
Hmm.
and mentally. You can also take them something that you're working on that you've got right here in your heart. You're very maybe you're not, but I know I am. I'm very hesitant to show somebody something I'm working on when I know it's not
Hmm.
done because the last
Yeah.
thing I need is somebody to shit on and be like, all right, well this fucking thing sucks, so throw it over and start all new.
Right.
So was that your sounding board for the entire book process?
Yeah, I mean, God bless her, she read every single draft. And
Mm,
like I said, some of them are 40 drafts. She directed and produced the audiobook version of it. And I tour with this as a one-man show. She directs that because, she loves it. She just loves it. She's
yeah,
very hands-on. But when I would give her a story, like all I want to know is did you enjoy it? Did you want to
yeah.
turn the page or not? And that's it. And sometimes she didn't. And when she didn't, I didn't argue with her. I just said, okay, I have to fix this, you know?
When did you know? I've always heard editing is like it's not one of the hardest things, but it's one of the hardest things to like kill your kids or kill your babies type of
Hmm.
thing whenever you're writing something. How hard was this to edit down?
See, that's the thing. That's the mark of an inexperienced writer. See, when you're in
Yeah.
TV, you have to do so much rewriting that In the beginning, when you're starting off, oh, it's my favorite joke. And now it's like, man, who gives a crap? I'll write another one. It's not a big deal. So,
Yeah.
so if something doesn't work, it's not, I don't feel like it's, the expression is, yes, kill your babies. I don't even feel that. I'm like, all right, get rid of it. I can come up with more. That's what I do. It's not a big deal. The
With
same way when
25,
you drop something on the, when you're cooking something and you drop it on the floor, you don't cry, you don't dust it off. I'll make another one. This is what I do.
absolutely. Absolutely.
No,
Now, would you have that same sentiment at a 25-year-old, Michael?
no. When I was 25, everything was perfect.
Yeah.
Everything I wrote had to make it on TV, and so no. I mean that comes with maturity.
When do you think you finally learned that it's okay to punch something up or start over? You remember having that moment?
Well, I was a writer on King of the Hill, and this something happened. We were they the showrunners had us. I was in the room. There were three rooms. There was like the story room. There's a story room for future episodes. That was the third room. So there's one room's working on this week's episode. Another is working on, next week's episode. And then there was also a joke room where they'd say, hey, we need a line over here. Here's the script. We need a couple lines over here. And so I was just like, first couple of weeks I was there. I was in the joke room. I'm trying to impress everybody. And we're struggling online. And I pitched something that hit it out of the park. Like everyone was like, they were roaring on this line. So I take this line the joke line, I took it into the showrunners. They were in one of the other rooms. I go, here, watch this. Right, here's a setup and a boom, and the joke, and everyone in the room roared. The showrunners, that's great. And they go, come up with five more. And I said, what do you mean
Mm.
five more? I just killed it. This joke is gonna kill. They go, yeah, well, five more. And then I was mad about it, right? And I went back to my office. I was fuming. I said, what's wrong with these assholes? This is the line. Everyone loves it, right? But then I was like, but you know what? They are paying me a lot of money. So to write jokes. So fine, I will. So I was like, screw these assholes. I'll write 10 more jokes. And you know what? I wrote 10 more jokes, and some of them were really good. I don't know if they were quite as good as that one, but a lot of them were really good. And after that, I was like, all of this is disposable. I just taught me a lesson, which was like, I can write more, there's more.
That's a good lesson to learn, man.
Yeah.
Now, with obviously back in the day, you guys were probably writing on paper. I know, with my line of work, any recipe, any technique, anything our chef's saying, we're writing stuff down so that way we can refer back to it. And I used to have, I mean, I've got a little yellow notepad that I'm writing stuff down with now. But I mean, when I'm in perfect example right here, man, I've got like probably 15 or 20 of this style little book, little $5 $6 book of just nothing but
Mm-hmm.
recipes and stuff that I've had from the last 6 years or 7 years, whatever it's been, 6 7 years I've been in the industry. um did you guys save any of those books that you guys wrote notes down? Was it always something you guys had to leave back? And
This is the book. It says composition, writing. I mean, it's like a fourth grade book, right? But I
yeah.
started keeping this when I was a young writer on Just Shoot Me, and I was
Mhm.
sitting at the feet of really great writers, and they would say smart things, and I was like, I just kept a list. Some of them Greg Daniels said, some of them, other writers, and so I just kept notes, and so like I started, at one point I started an online screenwriting course, and I just opened this up, and I just
Yeah.
started here. Like these are my private notes that I've kept from working, sitting at the feet of really talented writers.
Well, that was my next question. Have you ever thought about putting that out there to the public or putting that into a book format so people could, like, writing by Stephen King is one of his best
Yeah,
books.
and I
I didn't know
haven't
if you
read
had thought
that.
something like that. Oh,
I
it's
haven't ever even read that.
it's really good.
The thing is, I when the pandemic hit, I had a friend who was urging me to make a screenwriting course. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm kind of busy. Then the pandemic hit, Hollywood shut down, and so I was like, all right, well now I have time, and so I didn't make a book, but I made an online screenwriting course. And so if anyone's interested, it's still available. It's at michaeljamin.com/course. But yeah, so it's really just me. That's the funny thing is I haven't read Stephen King's book on writing. I haven't read any books on writing. Everything I've learned from other working writers. So,
And there's something about that on the job training that speaks loads. You can learn a lot through a book, but through, physical application of something, I don't think you really learn until you physically
oh, you
doing
learn
it.
so much just from people. I was so always blown away, especially on Just Shoot Me. These writers they would watch a show over the weekend or a movie, and they'd say why it didn't work and what they would fix about it. I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly right. How do you know? So
All right, man. I got two more questions here,
Sure.
and then I figured we can end it. Um, one of the chapters, and I meant to write this one down, and I thought I had it in my phone, but I don't. What was the one? What was the name of the chapter where you go back to a love interest and
Mm.
you go to her house when you're an adult? What was the name of that chapter?
A Paper Orchestra. I named the book after that chapter. So,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
yeah,
I feel like I should have fucking known that one. That one was right on the nose, plain on the site.
that was,
Michael, I
yeah,
failed you. I'm so sorry.
that's okay.
Um, but that one got me thinking, obviously we always have, it's not so much that first love or that person that you first get in contact with, you're like, oh, this is the one. That's what love does to you.
Hmm.
It clouds, not I want to say it clouds your judgment in a bad way, but it takes hold of you like some virus, and it's
Yes.
like, this is the person I'm supposed to be with, right?
Hmm.
Now, what was it like? I can't watch extremely violent shows. I can't watch something that's very,
Yeah.
very crazy because not that I feel bad for the person, even if it's not that I feel bad for Jeffrey Dahmer. I feel bad for the people that he killed, but I have this innate ability to like sponge onto the sadness that I'm seeing or the emotions. Like I have a
Hmm.
hard time like letting that baggage go that's not my baggage, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
When you're going into this chapter, this part of your life, and you're physically going to this lady's house and walking through and thinking like, could have this been us? Could that have
Hmm.
been my kid?
Yeah.
What is that like mentally and emotionally? Obviously, you tell the emotional side, but mentally, I got to imagine like it's fucking wild to sit there and try to conceptualize this.
Well, yeah, that story, it's a true story. It's about me getting in touch with my old college girlfriend, this girl that I loved, who broke up with me and broke my heart. And so now, 30 years later, or whatever, I meet up with her again and go to her house. So if we were in a writer's room on TV and I said, we're going to tell a story about that, about a guy meeting up with his ex-girlfriend, uh, what the first two storylines that people would pitch with, oh, okay, so he's either going to murder her or they're going to have an affair, one or the other. Those are the two
Yeah.
stories those are the only two versions, right? But what I like so much about the genre of personal essays is I didn't do either of those two things. I think the truth is more interesting. The truth is I wanted to see her and I wanted her to tell me something, but I wanted her to give me the answer of something, but I didn't want to have to ask the question. I wanted her to tell me without asking the question because I felt that would be cheating, right, in some way. And so the question that I wanted answered was, how did she remember me? Which is, I think, what we all want. How are we remembered by people who, like, was I just nothing to her? Was I like, what did she think about it all these years later? And so that's what I said to get out from that is just, and as I was there, I knew I was going to get a story out of this. So the whole time I'm there in her house, I'm being very conscious of, okay, how do I feel right now? How do I feel now? How do I feel? What's going on? What is she doing? And I'm constantly checking in with myself. It was like it almost like outer body, but to so that I could write about it later. And that's exactly what I was able to do.
So whenever I have you guys on, or whenever I have an idea of something, I typically the first 15 minutes, I don't know. I loved your story about the first time you tried cannabis, and I thought it was very, very fun.
Yeah.
So I think we can all remember my first time was really, really wild. I thought I was an X-Man for a little while. I
Hmm.
legitimately thought I had superpowers, but that's neither here nor there. So now at the stage, like the first 15 minutes after I consume, whether it's an edible, I smoke a joint, I typically feel like I'm at my most productive or creative, right? I have all these
Hmm.
ideas, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, and I always have like my phone on me, or I always have pads of papers and pens all around the place. So if I got an idea and I write it down, and much like you were talking about with your book, like you write something down or you write something out, and then if you come back to it and it's something, there's something there, right? So same kind of
Hmm.
concept. I'll do stoned me and then sober me. If I come back and I look at it sober, I'm like, oh man, that might be something. I might underline it or circle it, then I'll come back to it again, inebriated,
Hmm.
and then I'll come back. So I'm just cycling, right?
Yeah.
Levels of consciousness. Um, so when you're doing that, not so much when you're doing that, excuse me, when you're going through this house with this lady,
Mm,
obviously I don't think you have a pen and paper and you're writing down all of
right,
this stuff. You're trying to stay in your head. So I got
right.
to imagine you're already pretty stressed out. The emotions are running high.
Yeah.
You're already saying you're a super anxious person. So I got to
Mm.
imagine the anxiety's through the roof. I got to imagine your heartbeat going a mile a minute. So when you're in that fight or flight stage, very hard to sit here and try to be focused. And you're saying it's already an out of body experience. So you're already
Yeah.
trying to grip onto anything. It's like Inception when he rolls that die. You're trying to
Hmm.
grip onto any part of reality to make you tethered to this world, right?
Right.
How are you remembering everything? How are you feeling all of that go in and still retain it?
Well, I wasn't quite as anxious in that moment as maybe you think I was. I was, I
Mm,
wasn't my heart wasn't racing. I was just more
yeah.
like, I just felt a little uncomfortable being there. And so I was just, uh, yeah, I was just really trying to observe, and I was watching her, and I was just watching myself, but I guess I wasn't too panicked about it. But a lot of times when I'm writing, especially stories from the past, way in the past, like I may not remember all the dialogue, but I remember how I felt. And if I remember how I felt in that moment, I can easily fill in the dialogue. I know what I might have said. And
Mhm.
so, and then it feels true because, it's based in reality.
Is any of it like hearing a song and then being transported back in time to like, man, I remember when I was 16 and I heard, Smells Like Teen
Mm.
Spirit for the first time. Is
Hmm.
it tied to that for you or?
Not so much, but I do know what you're talking about with music.
Yeah.
Music can definitely take you back, as can smells. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, smells. Yeah, but not. It
Well,
was not so much like that. But yeah, I know what you're
y-
talking about.
you you might have not been that anxious during that chapter, but I was anxious as hell during
You
that chapter. I was
were
like, what's gonna happen?
okay.
What's gonna happen? Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah, like I
Well,
said,
you know
man.
how there's a trick I did that because the trick was up until I'm writing the past tense, but the minute I get to her house and I go inside, I switch to the present tense.
Mhm.
And so what that allows me to do is now I'm living it with as you are experiencing the reader and the author are going through it at the same time. So I did that intentionally to make you feel anxious, to make you feel like because clearly when I'm writing in the past tense, we know I know I'm guiding you, but in the present tense, I'm learning it the same time you do. And so I think that makes you anxious, which is how I wanted it to come across. So thank
The
you.
weed. Before we sign off, do you remember that one joke that you absolutely killed with that you were talking about?
Oh, on King of the Hill,
Yeah.
I swear to God, I don't remember.
You'll
I
remember
don't
right after we
remember.
get
But
off the
and
call. It'll come to you.
no, the thing is, like, people ask me about like what's my favorite joke. Like, I don't like when you like I said, after I pitched it, I got a big laugh, but then I came up with 10 more, 9 more that were equally, good. So like I don't remember it. It's all disposable. The same way when you're making a dish, like, you know, you'll make more. It's like none of them are
Yeah.
precious to you because you'll come up with another one. And the newest one is the one you love the most, you know?
Sometimes, yes, there's two dishes that are you ever seen Ratatouille?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
Ego, he eats that ratatouille, he's transported back in time. There's two dishes in particular that every time I eat it, every time I see it, I think of my granny. And that's fried chicken and that's mac and
Hmm.
cheese because we grew up super Southern.
Right.
And those were the two dishes that you knew when they were on. Granny always put love into everything,
Well,
right?
that's comfort food. That's comfort food.
That's it's a lot of comfort food.
Yeah.
And I feel comfortable gaining a little bit of weight when I think and eat the fried chicken and mac and cheese,
Right.
but whenever you saw those two dishes in particular, you knew Granny put all of her heart, all of her love
Hmm.
for you and all of her soul into that. And it's just whenever I think of those two, those are the ones that doesn't matter what kind of day I'm having.
Right.
Shittiest day in the world, best day in the world. It elevates it to a good day, and it just takes it even farther if it was a
Wow.
great day. You know what I
I'm
mean?
sorry you can't make me a meal. I bet you can make a good meal.
Well, I tell you what, when we get off this call, if you're ever out in Florida, I'll tell you where to come at. So,
All right.
but like I said, Michael, I've had a blast. I've really been looking forward to this one. That's been in the works for, since sometime last year. And you didn't disappoint with your book or with you being here, man. It
Yeah.
was a real blast getting to talk to you. So tell the folks where they can go and find the name of the book and then the website and whatever else you want to push.
Yeah. So yeah, it's Michael Jamin. The book is called The Paper Orchestra, and you can find copies at michaeljamin.com/book. And you can find links if you want a signed copy, you can get it there, but you can find links on there to take you to Audible if you want the audio book or Spotify or Apple, but you can also get the ebook or the paperback on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or your indie booksellers online everywhere.
Beautiful. And those
Yeah,
links will be in the show notes in the description below. Well, Michael, like I said, man, this has been a real blast. I hope you had fun because I know I had
I
fun.
loved
Been looking
it.
through this one for a little while.
I really appreciate all the thought and attention you brought into these, reading the stories. It's I'm honored that you took that kind of time. So thank you.
Well, I mean, you took a lot more time writing this than I did reading it, man, because like I said, it's ladies and gentlemen, go pick this one up. I mean, Michael sent me a copy, but as soon as we're off this one, I'm gonna go over to the website and buy a little signed
You're
copy, man. I'm gonna put it
you're kind.
right back
Up
there on
there.
that bookshelf. Well, there's a bookshelf over here, but there's another bookshelf over here. That's all my
Awesome.
comic books, the funny pages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, he's been Michael. I've been Julian. This has been What's in My Head podcast, and this has been another piece of your childhood. Good night.
Thank you.